Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Our mission today is, let's be honest, it's enormous. We are strapping in for a high-speed, 2,500-year intellectual road trip across the entire landscape of Western political thought.
It really is. I mean, forget the textbooks.
Absolutely. We're here to give you the absolute core, the critical nuggets of knowledge you need to instantly understand the biggest ideas about justice, power, and, the ideal state.
It's a monumental task. We're tackling 10 pivotal thinkers, starting with the classical foundations in ancient Greece, this whole quest for the good life, and we're going to chart that path all the way through to the dark, really complex realities of the 20th century.
Yeah, where things like ideology and terror completely redefined what we even mean by political evil.
Exactly. It's the story of a dramatic philosophical shift.
It really is. We begin with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who saw politics as, well, fundamentally inseparable from ethics and virtue. Their entire goal was to create an ethical blueprint for the perfect state.
But then, as we cross into the modern era with someone like Machiavelli, everything changes. The focus shifts completely to this ruthless pragmatism, the management of power, totally divorced from any moral consideration.
It is such a profound change in focus.
Yeah.
I think the central thread we'll follow for you is this. How did the idea of justice, the ideal state, and the role of the individual,
Yeah.
how did all that morph over these 25 centuries?
Yeah, how do we go from, say, philosopher kings ruling for virtue to absolute monarchs ruling for security, and then eventually to these massive bureaucracies that rule through, manufactured consent?
Okay, let's unpack this monumental shift. We have to start right at the very beginning with the man who basically invented the question, Socrates.
We do.
So part one, the foundational Greeks.
We start in Athens, around 469 BCE, with Socrates. And it's important to understand what was going on before him. The great thinkers, we call them the pre-Socratics, they were essentially physical scientists.
Right, they were concerned with cosmology.
Exactly. They were trying to figure out the fundamental properties of the universe. Is everything made of water? Is it fire? Some other unknown substance? That was the big question.
So they were focused on the whats of the natural world, the physical stuff. But Socrates, he just turns that completely on its head and looks inward, asking the how of human existence.
He does. He initiated what scholars call the Socratic shift. He basically argued that it wasn't enough to know what constitutes existence. The far more important question is, what constitutes a good life?
And that one question becomes the foundation of everything that follows.
Everything. The objective of life is to lead a good life. And that fundamentally requires the knowledge of what a good life actually entails.
And this leads directly to his core intellectual punchline. Knowledge is virtue. But I think we often misread that today as just a quaint little platitude. It's actually a radical intellectual demand, isn't it?
Oh, it's a huge demand. It's a precondition for an ethical life. For Socrates, true knowledge isn't just, having an opinion. It's conceptual. It's unshakable. It's logically proven. And this true knowledge is the necessary prerequisite for leading an ethical life. He defined ignorance, on the other hand, as mere opinions or beliefs. And the problem with opinions is that they're inherently shaky, they're unstable, and they can lead to unethical actions.
So his argument is you can't knowingly do evil. If you really truly understand what the good life is, you wouldn't choose to do bad things.
That's the core of it. Evil is a product of ignorance, not malice.
Okay, so if your life is built on these shaky opinions, you need a mechanism to test them. And he basically invented the process of rigorous cross-examination to kill bad ideas.
He invented dialectics. It's logical reasoning, yes, but its power lay in challenging opinions in a systematic way. The whole purpose of dialectics is to rigorously examine your own arguments, acknowledge their inherent limitations.
To see the holes in your own thinking.
Precisely. And then through logical self-correction, you arrive at something that is conceptually true and hopefully unshakable.
That methodology, it feels like the core engine of modern democracy and science.
It absolutely is. I mean, think about the foundation of parliamentary democracy or even scientific peer review. It's based on robust debate and discussion. The Socratic method requires the critical examination of beliefs.
No matter how sacred they seem.
No matter how sacred, whether they're outdated social customs like superstitions or social policies like discrimination, the goal is to ensure that social progress is based on rational logic, not just, this is how we've always done it.
And if you refuse to engage in that essential process of self-correction, of self-examination, that's where we get, I think, the most famous political quote in history. An unexamined life is not worth living.
And that single statement just encapsulates his entire ethical and political system. It's not just a nice phrase. If you operate on shaky opinions, you are living in ignorance, and therefore you are incapable of leading a genuinely good life.
So your life lacks a fundamental moral worth.
Because it lacks knowledge. It lacks that foundation.
Wow. And the ultimate proof of his convictions, of course, came in 399 BCE when Athenian democracy charged him with impiety and corrupting the youth. He's condemned to death, but he's given the chance to escape. Yet he chooses to drink the hemlock. Why? Why sacrifice himself for the very state that he felt had condemned him unjustly?
It was the final defining Socratic lesson, a demonstration. He wanted to prove that life carries no meaning if we cannot live according to the ideas we subscribe to.
So it was about integrity.
It was the ultimate act of integrity. His death was a demonstration of principled obedience to the state. He argued that it is the citizen's duty to obey the orders of the state, even when those orders appear fundamentally wrong or unjust.
That's a tough pill to swallow. Why?
Because from his philosophical perspective, the individual citizen may be limited and ignorant. You might think the law is wrong, but you could be mistaken. The state, on the other hand, is the repository of law and order. It must be obeyed to preserve the social contract that keeps everyone from chaos. To defy it is to claim you know better than the collective wisdom of the law.
And for Socrates, that would be the ultimate arrogance, an act of ignorance.
The ultimate act of ignorance.
Okay, so Socrates' execution then profoundly affects his greatest disciple, Plato. Plato inherits that Socratic drive for knowledge and applies it to building the conceptual perfect state. His mission becomes, how do we build a state that's ruled by knowledge so that an injustice like the execution of Socrates can never, ever happen again?
Precisely. Plato becomes the father of political philosophy and the founder of philosophical idealism. His works are almost all dialogue, so he's continuing that dialectic tradition. But he shifts the focus from the individual's pursuit of knowledge to the state's pursuit of the ideal.
And this is where his famous theory of idea comes in. He argues for a universal, perfect blueprint for everything that exists in this world of eternal reality that's beyond our messy physical senses.
Exactly. For Plato, the ultimate reality is the idea. The physical world matter, the things we see and touch, that's merely a pale, imperfect reflection, a shadow of the real thing.
It's like a bad photocopy.
A very bad photocopy. And he used dialectics to prove that matter is the antithesis, and the idea is the perfect synthesis, belonging to this world of permanence. And you have to remember, this idealism was born from the poor, ignorant, and chaotic state of Athenian governance he witnessed firsthand.
Right, the democracy that killed his teacher. And to teach this concept, to get people to understand this very abstract idea, he gave us the allegory of the cave. This is the ultimate wake-up call for the ruling class.
It is. It's a powerful metaphor. You have these prisoners chained in a cave, facing a wall their whole lives. They see shadows cast on the wall from a fire behind them, and they believe these shadows are reality.
Because it's all they've ever known?
It's all they know. For Plato, escaping the cave means achieving true knowledge. It means walking into the sunlight and seeing the world as it truly is. And he intended this to teach the rulers that their ultimate duty wasn't pursuing pleasure or wealth, but to achieve this vision of true reality and, crucially, true justice.
So let's talk about justice. What is justice in his magnum opus, the Republic? Because it's not a set of laws, is it?
No, not at all. It's internal and it's moral. Justice for Plato is a part of human virtue and the bond which joins men together. It's the necessary precondition for harmonious coexistence in a society.
Okay, so like a well-tuned instrument.
A perfectly tuned instrument. Just like truth is the first virtue of any thought system, justice is the first virtue of any state.
And this concept of justice, it relies on three key principles that apply to the state, but they also mirror the individual's soul. Let's slow down on these because they're essential to his whole vision.
Okay. First, we have functional specialization. This means every individual performs duties solely according to their unique capacity or merit. You do what you're naturally best at.
A place for everyone and everyone in their place.
Basically. Second, non-interference. This is huge for Plato. Each class, whether it's the rulers, the soldiers, or the producers, must strictly stick to its assigned duties. A shoemaker shouldn't try to be a soldier. This is the prerequisite for unity.
And the third part brings it all together.
The third is harmony and interdependence between those three classes. He famously categorizes them as the men of gold, who are defined by wisdom or reason. These are the rulers. The men of silver, defined by courage or spirit, the soldiers. And the men of copper, defined by appetite, the producers, the farmers, the craftsmen.
And this structure of the state is a direct reflection of the individual. The just soul, where reason dominates courage and appetite, mirrors the just state, which is governed by the wisest man.
Exactly. The macrocosm of the state reflects the microcosm of the soul.
But here's the crucial contradiction, isn't it? His perfect state is inherently undemocratic. It relies on absolute rigidity and a lack of social mobility.
That's the major critique, and it's a powerful one. Plato's justice lacks legal sanction. It's a purely moral concept. And you're right, it restricts social mobility. A person born into the producer class, even if they show the capacity for leadership, is effectively stuck there. This system gives absolute, unchecked power to the gold class, the philosophers, and that risks tyranny.
Which is why the foundational myth of this supposedly just society, the myth of metals, was famously called a noble ally by critics like Nietzsche. He's basically saying you have to lie to the citizens to make this work.
It was a necessary philosophical lie from Plato's perspective. It was meant to convince the masses that they belonged to different metals based on their inherent nature, thus enforcing these rigid, anti-humanitarian class divisions. This lie was designed to prevent the state from collapsing into the chaos of Athenian democracy, which Plato absolutely hated.
And the linchpin of the whole system, the person who makes it all work, is the philosopher king. This is the ultimate anti-democratic blueprint for specialized governance.
It's his deepest conviction, he says. Until philosophers are the rulers or rulers learn the philosophy, there is no end to the predicament of human life. This ruler, trained rigorously from childhood in mathematics, philosophy, and dialectics, holds absolute authority. He's not limited by public opinion or even by law.
Because his wisdom is the law.
His wisdom is supposed to be superior to any written law, which is just a rigid approximation of justice. Although Plato did stipulate that the king could not change the fundamental constitution itself.
Now, to guard against the corruption that even the wisest person might face, the lure of property and family, Plato proposed communism as a necessary safeguard, but only for this guardian class.
Yes, a radical ethical mechanism. It included communism of property, which meant the guardians, the rulers and soldiers, couldn't own any private property beyond the bare necessities.
Okay, that's one thing. But then there's the even more controversial communism of family.
Right. The idea of the state regulating marriage for eugenic purposes, matching the best men with the best women to produce the best offspring, and then taking custody of all children at birth is shocking to modern ears.
It's incredibly shocking. What was the political goal of dissolving the traditional family unit for the ruling class?
Well, there were two main goals. First, to check nepotism. If rulers don't know who their biological children are, their loyalty can only be to the stid as a whole, not to their own family. Second, it was meant to liberate women from domestic chores, allowing them to fully contribute their talents to the state.
So it was actually a form of emancipation for women in the ruling class.
In a way, yes. Plato, despite his patriarchal era, made no gender distinction for guardian training. He believed talented women should be educated and should rule alongside men.
And yet his own star student, Aristotle, looked at this whole elaborate system and basically said, this is regressive and it's completely impractical.
He did. Aristotle argued that property is a source of achievement, motivation, and stability. Common ownership, he said, leads to neglect, because what belongs to everybody belongs to nobody. It becomes no one's responsibility.
He also slammed the communism of family.
Viciously. He argued it stripped people of the emotional stability and the deep human bonds that family life provides. He saw it as an unnatural attempt to impose a false unity on the state that would ultimately weaken it, not strengthen it.
So this brings us to Aristotle, who is Plato's greatest disciple and at the same time his most formidable critic. With Aristotle, we see this critical shift from philosophical idealism, the state that should be, to political science, the state that is actually practicable.
Exactly. He moves from the ideal to the scientific. He is the father of political science because his methodology was fundamentally different from Plato's. He wasn't just working from first principles in his mind.
So what was his method?
His approach was scientific, historical, comparative, inductive, and observational. He didn't start with an abstract idea of what the perfect state looks like. He started by studying 158 actual constitutions from the Greek city-states and beyond. He focused on inventory and description first, trying to understand how things actually work in the real world.
And his theory of the state flows from that observation of human beings in their natural setting.
Yes. For him, man is by nature a political animal. Zoon politikon. The state is a natural creation. It's not artificial. It's the final and highest form of community, and it aims at the highest good.
He had a teleological view, right? That things have a purpose or an end goal.
A very strong one. He argued the state comes into existence for the sake of a good life, and it continues to exist for the sake of a good life. He even stated, and this can sound a bit chilling to us, that the state is prior to the family and the individual, since the whole is of necessity prior to the part.
So the well-being of the totality, the state, supersedes the individual part.
For him, an individual who can live outside the state is either a beast or a god, but not a human.
But when he defined citizenship, this great champion of the political animal suddenly narrows the category quite significantly. Who was truly a citizen in the Athenian polis for Aristotle?
His definition was extremely stringent. A citizen is one who shares power in the deliberative or judicial administration of the state. To do that, you need time, you need education, and you need leisure. You can't be working all day.
So who was excluded from this active political life? Who was left out?
Well, the list is long. Women, because they supposedly lack the deliberative faculty. Slaves, due to their perceived lack of intellectual capacity. The young, the old, and anyone engaged in manual labor or trade because their work deprived them of the necessary leisure.
So the ideal citizen was basically the economically independent gentleman.
That's a perfect way to put it. Someone with sufficient leisure, education, and experience to devote himself fully to the affairs of the state.
This brings us to the most uncomfortable contradiction in the work of the father of constitutionalism, his infamous defense of slavery.
It is a profound hypocrisy, and it's difficult to grapple with. He defended slavery both on natural grounds, the idea that some people are born lacking reason and are natural slaves, and on utilitarian grounds.
What was the utility? What was the practical benefit for the state?
The core utility was that slavery provides the master, the citizen, with the necessary leisure to enhance his own virtue and participate in politics. A slave, for Aristotle, was simply an instrument of action, a living tool necessary for the proper functioning of the household and, by extension, the state.
Wait, so the father of constitutionalism, the man who championed reason as the highest human faculty, fundamentally needed human degradation for his system of enlightened governance to function. How do scholars even try to reconcile that contradiction?
They don't, not easily. It's often seen as a classic case of a brilliant mind justifying a prevalent and economically convenient social custom with sophisticated philosophical arguments. Modern thought, exemplified by someone like Kant, rejects this entirely. Kant argues that each man is an end in itself. No one ought to treat another person as a means to an end. Human dignity is absolute.
Aristotle's reasoning just falls completely flat on that point.
It does, by modern standards.
Okay, let's look at his more practical defense of the individual through the concept of property, which is a direct rebuttal of Plato.
Yes, here he's on much firmer ground. He proposed the solution of individual ownership and common use. He completely rejected common ownership because he believed it destroys individual motivation and responsibility.
The tragedy of the commons idea.
In a sense, yes. He viewed private property not just as an economic good, but as a psychological one. It is a source of achievement, a source of stability, a motivation to work hard, and it allows for the moral virtue of charity and generosity, which you can't have if nothing is yours to give.
Moving to governance, his study of those 158 constitutions gave him the framework for classifying governments, which really established the basis for comparative politics.
It did. He classified them based on two simple factors: the number of rulers, and whether they ruled in the common interest, which he called the pure forms, or in their own self-interest, the perverted forms.
So rule by one person for the common good is a monarchy, which he thought was the best pure form. But if it serves only the ruler, it degenerates into tyranny, the worst perverted form.
Exactly, and rule by a few is an aristocracy if it's pure, or an oligarchy if it's perverted and ruled by the wealthy.
And then rule by the many.
Rule by the many is a polity in its pure form or democracy in its perverted form. And this is important for Aristotle. Democracy was a bad word. It meant mob rule, where the poor used their numbers to expropriate the rich.
So this whole exhaustive taxonomy is interesting, but the real takeaway for him is his preference for the polity.
It is. The polity is the application of his core philosophical principle, the golden mean.
The golden mean. Avoid the extremes.
Always. The golden mean is about finding the virtuous middle ground between destructive extremes. Polity, for him, is a blend of oligarchy and democracy, and it's ruled by a stable, prosperous middle class.
Why the middle class?
Because the middle class avoids the extremes of the rich, who can be arrogant and have contempt for the law, and the poor, who can be desperate and fall for demagoguery. Because the middle class is trusted by both the rich and the poor, a polity is the form of government most likely to achieve stability and avoid revolution.
And stability was his overriding concern. His theory of revolution is still taught in political science departments today.
It is, because he focused on diagnosis and prevention, not just description. His fundamental insight was this: poverty is the parent of revolution and crime. He saw that the main cause of revolution is a feeling of inequality.
So what are the warning signs for a state that is heading toward collapse?
The general causes are a desire for equality in an oligarchy, or a desire for inequality in a democracy. But the particular causes are things like profit-seeking by officials, feelings of dishonor, and most importantly, the rise of demagogues who exploit economic disparity for their own gain.
His remedies seem pretty modern.
They're timeless, inculcating obedience to law, preventing the concentration of power in one person's hands, and subjecting public finances to open scrutiny. These are still the central tenets of good governance today.
We see that same sense of balance again in his theory of justice. It's not about strict numerical equality, but what he called proportional equality.
Right. For him, distributive justice assigns every person their due according to their contributions or their merit. He famously said, "It is unjust to treat equals unequally. It is equally unjust to treat unequal equally."
That principle is highly relevant today, especially in debates about things like affirmative action.
Absolutely. It provides the philosophical basis for positive discrimination. If the starting line is unequal due to historical disadvantage, then simply applying the principle of merit alone is actually unjust. Proportional equality requires some form of social leveling to address those underlying inequalities first.
Finally, we have to recognize Aristotle as the father of constitutionalism. This was his greatest, most enduring political contribution, and it's his final word on the failure of Plato's absolutism.
It is. He completely rejected the idea that any single individual, no matter how wise, should hold unlimited power. The philosopher king was a dangerous idea to him.
Why? What was better than a perfectly wise ruler?
Law. He stated it very clearly. The rule of law is preferable to that of a single citizen, and his reasoning was simple and profound. Law is reason without passion.
Oh.
The collective wisdom embodied in law, which has been developed over generations, is superior to the fleeting, potentially passionate judgment of even the wisest ruler.
And his constitutional rule had three core elements that really form the basis of modern liberal governance.
Yes. First, the rule must be in the common interest, not for a select few. Second, adherence to the Constitution is non-negotiable. And third, the subjects must be willing rule, has to be based on consent, not just force. His defense of these limits is, without a doubt, the foundation of modern constitutional civilization.
Okay, now we make the sharpest transition in Western philosophy spanning the, 1,500 years between Aristotle and the Renaissance. We land squarely in Italy with Niccolo Machiavelli. This is the moment when politics officially breaks up with ethics.
It's a complete divorce. Machiavelli is the first truly modern political thinker. He just throws out the entire classical pursuit of the good life and replaces it with the cold, hard analysis of power. His focus is on empiricism and realism, how rulers actually behave, not how they should behave.
His core insight is the centrality of power, that politics is, at its root, the management of power. And all of his advice flows directly from his incredibly cynical assessment of human nature.
He believed individuals are fundamentally wicked, selfish, restless, ambitious, and driven entirely by personal gain. They're ungrateful, they're fickle. He famously observed that people are far more resentful of the loss of their property than they are of personal violence, even the death of a family member.
That is the core cynical nugget right there. The successful ruler has to understand that his subjects prioritize their wallet over almost everything else.
Exactly. And this shaped all his advice to the prince. Maintain order, but above all, avoid being hated. And the primary way to avoid being hated is by not harming your subjects' property or their women. The threat of violence is tolerable, financial ruin or the violation of family is not.
Machiavelli is also called the father of Western secularism. How did he view religion?
Purely utilitarian. He personally criticized the church for causing Italy's division and weakness, but he saw religion strictly as a tool for the ruler. It provides kind of divine sanction for decisions. It helps maintain social discipline. It's a mechanism for influence and control over the volatile masses.
So it's an instrument of statecraft, not a source of spiritual truth.
For him, yes, it's about what works to hold the state together.
So let's get to the key qualities of the successful prince, according to his infamous advice manual, The Prince.
The number one priority is stability and order. And when it comes to reputation, his most famous and most chilling counsel is, it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both.
Why fear?
Because fear is reliable and controllable. It's a sentiment you impose on your subjects. Love, on the other hand, is fickle and easily lost. It depends on them, not you.
He also says the ruler needs the dual qualities of cunning and strength.
The cunning of a fox and the strength of a lion. The fox can recognize traps, and the lion can frighten off the wolves. This allows the ruler to outsmart political enemies and overpower them when necessary. And this leads directly to his concept of dual morality.
The idea that the ruler operates beyond conventional morality.
Yes. This is where we get the famous ethical escape clause. The end justifies the means.
What did you really mean by that?
For Machiavelli, this means that the success of the action, the maintenance of state power and stability, takes precedence over any and all ethical considerations. He is the foundational figure in realpolitik, the focus on rational, effective means to achieve political goals, regardless of the moral cost.
If Machiavelli provided the Renaissance advice manual, Thomas Hobbes then formalized modern power into a systematic political philosophy, one grounded in rational self-interest. Hobbes lived through the chaos of the English Civil War, and that experience led him to focus entirely on order, security, and the individual's desperate need for self-preservation.
That's right. He was a materialist and an extreme individualist. His view of human nature is bleak, and it's driven entirely by the fear of death.
That fear of death is the engine of his entire system.
It is. He saw individuals as isolated, egoistic beings, driven by the desire for self-preservation, the pursuit of pleasure, and the avoidance of pain. And this constant anxiety, this fear of violent death, fuels a perpetual and restless pursuit of power, because power is the only thing that ensures your survival.
And when you put these self-interested, fearful individuals together without a higher power to keep them in check, you get the state of nature. This is the ultimate, inescapable nightmare scenario.
It's a dreadful state, which she defined as a war of all against all. Life in this state, famously, is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. There is no property, no industry, no law, no justice, only complete, terrifying liberty and the constant threat of violence.
So the social contract he proposes is merely the only rational path out of this existential misery.
Precisely. It's a logical deduction. To escape this constant war, individuals mutually consent to relinquish all of their natural rights except for the fundamental right to self-preservation to a single third party or assembly, which he calls the sovereign.
And the structure of that contract is critical.
It's absolutely critical. The contract is between subjects and subjects. They agree among themselves to give up their power. It is not a contract with the sovereign. The sovereign is the recipient of the power, not a party who is bound by the agreement.
And that structure makes the contract irrevocable and ensures the sovereign's authority is absolute. This is the Leviathan.
Yes. The sovereign power, the Leviathan, must be indivisible, unrestricted, and irrevocable. Hobbes believed that any division or limitation of sovereignty would mean its destruction, which would inevitably lead men right back to the miseries of the state of nature. His famous mantra was, "Covenants without swords are but words."
So where does liberty exist for the individual under this absolute ruler?
A very narrow space. Liberty exists only where the law is silent. The individual does, however, retain the absolute right to self-preservation. This means resistance is allowed, but only if the sovereign directly threatens your life or your ability to defend yourself.
It's paradoxical, then, that Hobbes, the architect of absolutism, is often considered the father of modern liberalism.
It is a paradox, but it makes sense because he was the first to make politics revolve entirely around the individual's desire for self-preservation and the protection of their interests. He introduced this idea of inviolable natural rights, even if it was just the one.
Okay, so following Hobbes, we enter the era of John Locke, who takes that focus on the individual and completely flips the script. Locke uses the idea of the social contract not to justify absolute power, but fundamentally to limit it. He's really the architect of the governing system that the U.S. Constitution adopted.
He is. Locke was hugely influential in the 1688 Glorious Revolution in England, and he pioneered classical liberalism. He accepted the idea of a state of nature, but he rejected Hobbes's premise that it was a constant war zone.
Right. Locke saw it as pre-political, but generally peaceful. It was characterized by peace, goodwill, mutual assistance, and self-preservation. People were already governed by the law of nature, which for him was divine reason.
And this is the critical break from Hobbes. For Locke, rights are inherent and they pre-exist government. These are the inviolable natural rights to life, liberty, and property. They are not granted by the state. They exist by nature, endowed by God.
So if the state of nature was so peaceful, why bother creating a government at all? What was the problem?
It was plagued by what he called inconveniences. 3 of them, specifically. First, the lack of an established, universally recognized law. Second, the absence of an impartial judge to settle disputes. And third, the lack of sufficient power to enforce the laws effectively.
So it wasn't a constant war, but it was unstable.
It was unstable. Self-judgment and disputes could lead to escalating conflicts and uncertainty.
So to fix those 3 inconveniences, Locke proposed his version of the social contract, which is essentially a trust agreement.
Yes, the goal is simply to establish organized laws and impartial institutions. The people form a civil society, and then they establish a limited government, primarily a legislative body based on trust. The government has a fiduciary responsibility to enforce the natural law, and this trust is conditional.
What happens if the government breaks that trust?
Then the people have the inherent right to dissolve or alter it. This concept of the right to revolution against tyranny is Locke's most influential and radical legacy.
And the central purpose of this entire government mechanism is the preservation of one specific natural right above all others.
Property. Locke explicitly stated, "The great and chief aim of men uniting into a commonwealth and putting themselves under government is the preservation of property." Property rights, which he argued are acquired by mixing one's labor with common holdings, pre-exist the state and are the foundation of liberty.
Which is why his government had very strict limitations on what it could do. What were those fundamental limits?
The government cannot violate natural rights, it cannot rule arbitrarily through decree, and crucially, it cannot impose taxes without the consent of the governed or their representatives. Taxation without representation, therefore, is illegitimate tyranny.
He also pioneered an early concept of the separation of powers.
He did. He distinguished between the supreme legislative authority, the executive, which enforces domestic laws, and what he called the federative power, which handles international actions like war and peace.
Okay, we move to the 19th century and John Stuart Mill. Mill takes Locke's foundations and refines them, particularly by looking at the quality of human life and the dangers to individual liberty that come from society itself, not just from the state.
That's a great way to put it. Mill retained the principle of utilitarianism, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, but he rejected his predecessor, Jeremy Bentham's purely quantitative approach.
The idea that pushpin is as good as poetry.
Exactly. Bentham saw all pleasures as equal. Mill injected quality into utility. He distinguished between higher pleasures, intellectual, moral, and lower pleasures, the purely physical ones.
And his famous statement captures this perfectly.
It does. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. It is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. For Mill, true happiness had to be combined with human dignity, character development, and self-control.
And this emphasis on dignity and development leads directly to his passionate defense of freedom, which is encapsulated in the harm principle.
Yes, the harm principle states that society can only interfere with an individual's freedom for one reason: self-protection. That is, to prevent direct harm to other people.
He distinguished between self-regarding and other-regarding actions.
He did. Individuals are completely sovereign over their self-regarding actions, actions that only affect themselves. They must be free from any state or social interference. Interference is only justified in other-regarding actions, where there are direct obligations to others and a risk of harm.
But the primary threat to liberty, for Mill, wasn't the government of the state. It was the suffocating weight of social opinion and custom.
It was the tyranny and intolerance of the majority. Social conformity was the biggest danger to human progress. He saw a society that demands rigid conformity as one that stunts human development and produces cramped and dwarfed human beings.
He even championed eccentricity.
He did, arguing that suppressing any opinion, no matter how offensive, is an assumption of infallibility.
Why is the freedom of expression so vital, even if we are absolutely sure an opinion is false?
He had 4 main arguments. First, we might be wrong, and the suppressed opinion might be true. Second, even wrong opinions often contain elements of truth necessary for a complete picture. Third, if we don't have to defend our true opinions against false ones, they become dead dogma. We don't really understand why we believe them. And finally, the clash of opposing opinions is necessary for the remaining truth to emerge and to thrive.
Mill also stands out as a pioneering voice for women's rights, which was very rare for his time.
He was a genuine feminist. He forcefully argued that the legal subordination of women is wrong in itself and now one of the chief hindrances to human improvement. He saw this legal oppression, the denial of property, suffrage, education, as crippling society's ability to utilize its full intellectual resources.
He's basically applying the harm principle to gender.
Exactly. Forced legal inequality inherently harms both the individual woman and society as a whole.
But despite championing freedom and representative government, he was, in some ways, a reluctant Democrat.
He was. He championed representative government because he thought it was essential for developing citizens' reason and judgment. But he was terrified of mobocracy and the political power of the uneducated masses.
So what was his solution?
Well, this elitist concern led him to advocate for things like weighted voting, where the educated would get more votes than the uneducated. And even more controversially, he advocated for benevolent despotism in colonies like India and China, reflecting a deep-seated fear that democracy, without the necessary civic culture, could destroy itself.
We now enter the 20th century. And the debates are no longer just about the size of government or the list of natural rights. They shift to how power operates through invisible cultural control and, conversely, through a kind of terror so profound it defies all previous definitions of evil.
Right. We begin with Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist philosopher who was imprisoned by Mussolini. Writing his famous prison notebooks, Gramsci was trying to solve a crucial puzzle. Why hadn't the predicted proletarian revolution succeeded in the advanced capitalist states of Western Europe?
And his conclusion really challenged Marx's core concept of economic determinism.
It absolutely did. Gramsci rejected the rigid idea that the economic base solely determines the superstructure, law, culture, ideology. He argued for a more dynamic, reciprocal relationship, emphasizing that culture and ideas, the superstructure, play an autonomous and often primary role in maintaining power.
And this leads to his key and still highly relevant concept, the theory of hegemony. This explains how the ruling class maintains its dominance through consent, rather than just through force.
Hegemony is intellectual and moral leadership. It's how the ruling class establishes its worldview as the accepted, unquestioned common sense of society. This dominance is achieved through ongoing negotiations and compromises that integrate diverse class interests, making the exploited class essentially accept the ideas of their exploiters as just the natural order of things.
He broke the superstructure down into two critical parts that maintain this control. You can think of it as a fortress of power.
That's a great analogy. You have political society, the coercive institutions, the military, the government, the legal system. These are the inner keep of the fortress, which use force to maintain order when necessary. But the outer walls of the fortress, the first line of defense, are civil society.
The non-coercive institutions.
Exactly. The institutions that generate consent and absorb political shocks. Schools, media, churches, libraries, associations, civil society acts as the primary defense mechanism for the capitalist system.
So if the ruling class controls the cultural narrative, then a direct frontal assault on the state is basically suicide. This required a completely new revolutionary strategy.
A totally new one. The first and most crucial stage is what he called the war of position. This is a long, covert, gradual struggle to challenge capitalist hegemony within civil society, to gain influence within cultural institutions and nurture a counter-hegemony. You have to change the way people think before you can change the state.
And only after that cultural groundwork is laid can the second stage begin.
Only then. That's the war of maneuver, the direct confrontation with the political state. But it's only effective after the war of position has weakened the state's ideological foundations.
And this cultural movement needs new kinds of leaders.
Yeah.
His famous organic intellectuals.
Right. These are not traditional academics sitting in an ivory tower. These are individuals who emerge organically alongside a new social class. They articulate and disseminate a counter-hegemonic ideology, giving a coherent voice to the unrepresented. Think of political entrepreneurs, union organizers, or spokespersons who translate the class struggle into cultural language.
Okay, our final pivotal thinker is Hannah Arendt. She experienced the rise of Nazism firsthand and spent her life responding to the political devastation of the 20th century. Her work, The Origins of Totalitarianism, defined a novel form of evil that previous philosophers really could not have imagined.
They couldn't have. She argued that totalitarianism was fundamentally different from previous forms of tyranny.
Kelsey.
Totalitarianism, she said, is based on terror and ideological fabrication. And crucially, terror in this system is not merely a tool for achieving power. It becomes a political aim and an end in itself. Totalitarian ideology, whether it's the supposed superhuman laws of nature for the Nazis or the superhuman laws of history for the Stalinists, provides the justification for the total reorganization and ultimately the annihilation of society.
And Arendt blamed modernity itself for creating the conditions for this kind of collapse.
She did. She argued that modernity prioritized the economic life, what she called labor, the necessity of biological survival over the political life. This focus on the private sphere led to the decline of the public sphere, the neglect of meaningful action, and the rise of centralized, anonymous bureaucratic administration.
So when citizens stop engaging politically and become just a depoliticized mass, it creates a vacuum.
A vacuum that enables demagogic leaders and mobocracy to take over.
She formalized this using her hierarchy of human activity, the vita activa, which she believed modernity had tragically inverted.
That's right. At the bottom is labor, the biological necessities, which belongs to the private realm. Next up is work, the fabrication of the artificial world-building things, creating laws. It's necessary, but it's not freedom. At the very apex is action.
What is action?
Action is the core political activity. It is interminable freedom experienced publicly with others. Action is synonymous with politics, and it's based on plurality, the fact that we are all unique, where individuals distinguish themselves through speech and deed in the public square.
Her view of power is also very distinct from Machiavelli or Hobbes.
Oh, completely. Power, for Arendt, is not coercive force. Power is a collective phenomenon. She said, power is never the property of an individual. It belongs to a group and remains in existence only so long as the group keeps together. It is the ability to act in concert. Power is the source of freedom. Violence, she argued, is merely an instrument, often used to dissolve true power.
And here's where we get to her most chilling and relevant concept, which emerged from her reporting on the trial of the Nazi official Adolf Eichmann: the banality of evil.
Eichmann, the official responsible for the logistical extermination of millions of Jews, did not appear monstrous at his trial. He seemed normal. Arendt realized the real culprit wasn't fervent ideological hatred, but a pervasive bureaucratic culture.
A culture of blind obedience.
Blind obedience, and this is the key, a shocking loss of imaginative capacity, the ability to think from the perspective of others.
So the evil wasn't monstrous and exceptional, it was unthinking and utterly systematic.
Exactly. Banal evil becomes faceless and systematic when ordinary people participate in it without thinking. They are just bureaucrats following orders, completely disconnected from the moral reality of their actions. Evil becomes normalized, routine, devoid of moral revulsion.
This concept is terrifyingly relevant today, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we talk about systemic discrimination or the role of social media in enabling mob violence.
It absolutely is. It applies wherever individuals become spectators and at times unthinking participants in processes that lead to widespread harm. It forces us to confront the moral failure of indifference and the absolute necessity for rigorous, constant thought.
Finally, she had a unique take on revolution. She criticized both liberals and Marxists for kind of missing the point.
She did. She criticized liberals for reducing revolutions merely to establishing a limited government, and Marxists for seeing them as solely about overcoming poverty. For Arendt, the true political capacity demonstrated in a revolution is the act of individuals acting together to establish a public space of freedom. The tragedy of most revolutions, in her view, is that the citizens who achieve that initial action are eventually denied the possibility of exercising that core political capacity once a new, stable constitution is established.
Wow. That was an incredible journey. We moved from the high ideals of the ancient world, where Socrates insisted that ethics and politics were inseparable, to a modern world where that ethical foundation was systematically stripped away.
It was. Replaced first by the necessity of security, then by rights, and finally by the terrifying realities of ideological and bureaucratic control.
The path is so clear when you lay it out. We saw Socrates and Plato striving for that ethical blueprint, Aristotle bringing in the pragmatic, scientific classification.
Then Machiavelli providing the ruthless instruction manual for seizing power, Hobbes establishing absolute security as the prerequisite for civilization, and then Locke and Mill setting the bounds of limited government and individual liberty.
And then the 20th century just blows it all up. Gramsci shows us how power is maintained through soft cultural consent, and art reveals the unprecedented nature of terror and the shocking capacity of systems to render evil utterly ordinary.
And the enduring takeaway for you listening to this is that these ideas are not just footnotes in a history book. They form the basis for every single debate on justice, leadership, and freedom that is happening today. We are constantly negotiating the tension between Plato's ideal ruler and Hobbes's necessary Leviathan.
Or between Mill's necessary freedom and Gramsci's manufactured consent.
All of it.
So we want to leave you with one final provocative thought that kind of ties the whole arc together. The founders of political philosophy, Socrates, Plato, even Aristotle, saw knowledge, virtue, and action as inseparable. They believed that to live justly, you must first know the good life.
But if, as Hannah Arendt demonstrated, political power can now be sustained by unthinking bureaucratic evil, and if, as Gramsci argued, consent can be manufactured by dominant ideologies and cultural institutions, then we have to ask a difficult question.
In this information-saturated era of complex systems, does the original Socratic dictum that knowledge is virtue still hold true? Or have we fundamentally changed the nature of political reality into a place where a certain kind of ignorance is simply required for the system to function?
Something to chew on until our next deep dive.